All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in to this virtual statewide roundtable conversation. My name is Melissa Buchholz, and in addition to sitting on the steering committee for Opportunity Wisconsin, I am also a small business owner. I own a restaurant in Milwaukee, Wisconsin called Odd Duck. I do work as well with several federal, state, and local organizations, including Main Street Alliance. PRON, which is Progressive Restaurants and Activists Wisconsin Network, and the MIRC, Milwaukee Independent Restaurant Coalition. I will be moderating tonight's town hall conversation with participants speaking from their homes across the state. Tonight's conversation is co-hosted by Opportunity Wisconsin and Main Street Alliance. Both are coalitions of Wisconsinites that have been working across the board to elevate the voices of our neighbors and to fight for social and economic systems that work for all of us, not just the privileged few. And that's what brings us here tonight. Now that the election results have been decided and certified, it's long past time for our elected officials to move forward together to address the many issues still facing Wisconsinites. As you all probably know, small businesses are the backbone of our economy. For months of the COVID-19 pandemic, small business owners have been left to fend for themselves here in Wisconsin. While congressional leaders may finally be close to a deal after 5 months without any aid, they absolutely must do more to address the needs of small businesses and communities across the state and across the country. Tonight, we will be sitting down with small business owners across the state of Wisconsin and discussing what's at stake in their communities, what items demand action from their elected officials, and make it clear to our officials that we must do better. And we call on our lawmakers to focus on COVID relief and to move forward and abandon partisan sparring. So with that, we're really excited to be joined this evening by Wisconsin State Treasurer Sarah Godlewski, who will shine some light on the struggles that lie ahead for small business owners and what can be done to help. We're going to begin by opening the floor to Sarah to speak and then allowing the rest of the speakers to introduce themselves and what they're going through. Then we'll have a moderated discussion about what issues they're facing. Tonight's discussion will not be open to questions from the media, but any interested press can reach out. The email address is press@opportunitywisconsin.org. We would be happy to connect you with one of our speakers. And I'd like to thank our speakers in advance for taking time out of your busy schedules to speak with us on these important issues. At this point, I'll hand it over to State Treasurer Sarah Godlewski. Thanks, Sarah.
Well, thanks, Melissa. Thanks for all your work in doing this on top of running your restaurant. And I also want to thank Opportunity Wisconsin and Main Street Alliance for really shining a light on this issue. Because these business owners are taking time out of their day when they are among a struggle that we've never seen before. And as a former small business owner myself, I will tell you, working with fellow small business owners, I mean, they have grit and have amazing work ethic, and they are the lifelines of our community. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Wisconsin is a small business state, and our economy speaks to that. 99% of our economy here in Wisconsin is thanks to small businesses. But yet, you know, despite the grit that we have and the innovative ideas that we bring to the table and our work ethic, no one ever imagined that we would be in the position we are today because of COVID-19. I mean, overnight, businesses had to close their doors or reduce their activity because of health and safety reasons. And there's no question doing that was the right thing to do, but it was hard. It was really hard. And in my conversations with people around the state, they honestly don't know what else they can do to keep their doors open. I mean, they've cut their costs, they've used their savings, they got creative, whether it was trying to transition to an e-commerce platform or try to sell gift cards or do curbside. And you know, despite their best efforts, they're simply just not getting the revenue that they need to stay afloat. And we're now 9 months into this pandemic, and Congress in the state of Wisconsin has only met once to do something. They literally have only taken action once. I mean, we look at here in the state of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois have done more for their constituents and small businesses than we have. And then if you look at the federal government, they passed the Paycheck Protection Program. And while that did help some small businesses, it was also ridden with mismanagement, as literally millions went to large corporations. We're talking pharmaceutical companies and hedge funds and private equity. And that was money that was supposed to go to Main Street, not Wall Street. And yet this Republican Congress never once asked for that money back. There was simply no accountability on who really got those funds. And so here in the state of Wisconsin, I will tell you that, the governor and I, for example, are doing what we can to help small businesses with our executive authority. The governor stepped up and did as much as he could with the We're All In grants, where millions went to ag businesses, arts, tourism, micro businesses. And then even my role as chair of a trust fund, we supported economic development across the state. And we did advocacy work for the Paycheck Protection Program, because as soon as that August deadline for applications stopped, and we still had $130 billion remaining, we brought business owners together to talk about, we need to extend this deadline to the end of the year. Business owners need to be able to apply for a second round of PPP funds. We need to make sure that micro businesses are actually getting this money, or businesses that are owned by minorities or women, people who don't have access to capital. And yet that was just 5 months ago, and still Congress has done nothing. There's $130 billion sitting in this PPP account. I mean, there's just simply no excuse. And what I worry about as the state treasurer is I think about the 2008 recession. It wasn't until a year or two later when we really saw the financial impacts of that recession. So we have to support our business community today so it doesn't cripple our entire economy later. And this reckless lack of support is simply unconscionable when we think about what's going on in Washington. And Wisconsinites' lives and livelihoods are on the front lines, and it's time to act and not play politics. So again, I just want to thank the small business owners for being on the call today. I want all of you to know that my door is always open. We need to fight for you and what you do for our communities, for your livelihood. And thanks again for being here and for sharing your story.
Thank you so much, Treasurer Godlewski, for your time and perspective and focusing us on the bigger issues. I do know that you have to duck out a little bit early, so I want to say to you, thank you so much for making the time to be here with us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. I do want to thank all of our other participants ahead of time for making space for this important conversation. I'd like to turn to each of you now and invite you just to briefly introduce yourself before we get into a further discussion. If you could just share with all of the people watching your name, a short introduction to your business and who you are before we get into the rest of our topics. We'll go around and learn each about a little bit about each of your backgrounds and what brings you here tonight. If you want to start, Corinne.
Yes, I am Corrine Hendrickson, owner of Corrine's Little Explorers Family Child Care Center in New Glarus, Wisconsin. And I have been licensed since 2009, and it's been a wild ride. I started after the recession, with the recession and everything. The first time, childcare was completely ignored and not supported, so we already were having issues. 69% of us in the state had closed since 2010. Of family child care and 10% of group centers. And now COVID is just crippling us. It's not looking good, and we definitely need more support.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Joella, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. My name is Joella Strebel. My husband Ty and I own Old Town Strings in La Crosse, Wisconsin, which is a small string instrument repair shop and retail shop and consignment shop for string instruments and accessories. We've been here since about since 2015. And our business is really based on building community around music and accessibility of the music community to people at all skill levels, all budgets, all ages. And so sort of losing some of the community aspect of bringing people together in our space has been a really big challenge, in addition to all of the other challenges that we've been facing. So look forward to sharing more about that. And thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Becky, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself next?
Sure. I'm Becky Cooper. My husband Ryan and I own Bounce Milwaukee in Bayview. It's a family entertainment center, restaurant, bar, axe throwing, laser tag, the whole 9 yards. And we essentially closed down in March and opened briefly again over the summer, but have closed back down, and really need to see a lot of effort from the federal government and the state government. So I'm glad to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. And Darren, last but not least, let's hear from you.
My name is Darren Price. My wife, Myra, and I own and operate BP Smokehouse Barbecue, located here in Tomah, Wisconsin. And we have had the restaurant since 2015. COVID-19 has really, it's been devastating, I would say, to many restaurants, and it's a challenge, particularly here. We're in a small town. So, you know, there's a lot that could be done by not only the state and federal government. It's really hard to get your head wrapped around the fact that the legislative body, the government, has basically one function, that is to look out for the welfare of the people. And yet they have done, and they've been derelict in, you know, from Washington to Madison, and it's just pathetic. But I'm happy to be a part of this conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Darren. Again, I just want to say thanks to all of you for being here tonight. I'm excited to get into our roundtable discussion, to hear from you folks about the difficulties of owning small businesses during this pandemic. We have definitely, all of us, waited too long for additional support from our federal and state governments, and time is running out. Many businesses across the state, from Rhinelander to Racine, every community is feeling it. We're on the edge of bankruptcy. We're seeing people who need additional grants and support, direct aid, not loans, or they're not going to make it through this crisis. In general, I'm just going to kind of go through and call on each of you and ask a couple different questions. And if you do have anything additional to say, obviously you can put it in the chat box and I'll see it, and I can respond to you in kind. So Kareen, I'd like to start with you. Since the start of the pandemic, what's been the impact? You got into this a little bit, but on small businesses like yours and the ones you work with, and are you worried about businesses like yours shutting down?
So for childcare especially, it's been difficult because our number one priority is to keep the kids safe and to care for them and educate them while doing so. And with COVID being COVID, it's really hard to know how to do that because we haven't had instructions that are statewide. Things that vary county to county, community to community. And so we're reaching out to each other and just not knowing what to do. And then there's always the concern that I'm going to spread it to my families in my community, and they're going to take it to their employers who are now small businesses who are now going to have to close. Or the same thing, vice versa, that where their workplaces, they're not safe enough, being kept safe for whatever reason, and then they bring it into my program, which then spreads and closes us down. So that's been a really difficult thing. And then also just watching all of my colleagues just be scared that we're gonna get sick, be scared for the same reasons, and knowing that a lot of us are on the brink of financial destruction. And if you're family childcare, and I'm lucky, I have a spouse he's a firefighter, so we're not concerned about our house, but there's single parents who are family childcare providers. If they lose their job, they lose their homes. And that's a really tough thing for me to know because I know these people and I care about them. And same thing, group centers, they're, losing teachers and can't hire anybody. So they're like on the brink of bankruptcy because they can't find teachers even though they have wait lists. So that again affects our entire communities because if we don't have the teachers, we don't have the space for the children, where are those parents going? So, how can they work? So childcare is really the crux of it all. And we're just so overlooked it so often that now I really feel like people are paying attention and that we need everyone's help to really make our voices heard and make it loud and proud that from Washington to Madison, as Darren said, we need to say, look, these are our tax-paying dollars. We've paid it in up all these years. I want it back. We need to support our small businesses and our families and our communities.
Yeah, and I want to say thank you to you, and I think all the parents out there are probably realizing right now through all this how much they value you. So I'm so sorry to hear that that's what you're going through in your industry. I know that it's tough in all industries, and I can't imagine when you're worried both about yourself, your own family, but also about other people's kids and their families. That's tough. Darren, I'd like to kind of go to you next and just have you talk a little bit about what COVID actually did to impact your business in its day-to-day operations. Have you been able to find people to work through this? What kind of changes have you made to your operations during the pandemic?
Well, COVID really exposed us to something that we really never thought about, and that was the whole customer base being affected all at one time. So that was really challenging. We do have employees who, again, some are students that we have, and some have families, and they're concerned about interacting with customers who may not, in the beginning, who may not, care, and they would come in and so forth. So we put some things in place, mandatory mask wearing. We put the signs up and so forth. And I've only had a couple of people that I had to hand a mask to, but they understood. Again, this whole thing really exposed in the food industry, because it's an industry of pennies. And, you need customers, repeat customers. And we manage it, I think, very well as a whole, as an industry. But this pandemic really exposed some things. So we had to go to curbside. We did some delivery. There were some rules that were lax that allowed us to do that. That worked initially, but then toward the summertime, things kind of loosened up and people were just getting out more. But we're right back into that period again where we were when we first shut down. And so it's a challenge, and we do need help. We need assistance from our representatives. And I find it very, as I said before, I can't get my head wrapped around the fact that these people work for us, but yet in this crisis, they don't hear us. They have their own agenda. And it has nothing to do with the small business operator, who is the backbone. It's without small business in the towns and all of these businesses that are mentioned here, the community doesn't thrive. And you have to have healthy people to come into our businesses. And it's like, they don't care and they don't get it. And so we have to have a grassroots change here after this pandemic. We really do, all of us. And I'd like to see more business owners get involved in government.
Yeah, I hear that. I think small businesses have sort of been forced to open back up. A lot of us without adequate support or protection. It's kind of like you're going through whiplash all of the time. And I think in the long run, it looks like we're going to end up with heading towards more and more permanent closures as we go back and forth. Especially since we don't seem to have a comprehensive system of testing and treatment. It's just feels reckless, It's very frustrating when you're trying to be not reckless and take care of your community. Let's see here. Becky, why don't we go to you next? The Paycheck Protection Program expired nearly 5 months ago, and there's still been no additional aid to fill the gaps. What do you think, in your opinion, has been the holdup on this, and who do you hold responsible for that?
I think Paycheck Protection Program was a decent idea early on for a very brief period. And I think when it was initially proposed, we thought that it was going to be a couple of weeks of shutdown or a couple months maybe. And as it's dragged on, and it's been very clear that no business can get back up and running to their full potential, nobody's been willing to step up again with a better longer term solution. A lot of companies like mine burnt through our PPP money trying to keep our employees having hours while we were doing much less business. We dropped from our busiest month of the year down to 3% of our usual sales. So even with the PPP money, we were losing money hand over fist, because as Darren said, you got to have healthy people to come into your business, and those people have to have money to spend at your business. Without that, we couldn't keep anything up and running. And once that money, it was supposed to be spent within 6 weeks, and then that got extended. And it was this constantly changing landscape as we're trying to navigate the confusion of the pandemic. It was just this additional layer of confusion. And I don't think that there's been a really good comprehensive plan from the federal government in particular to say, what does this look like longer term? What are the impacts that last beyond the pandemic? Because just because the vaccine is coming out, just because things are starting to turn around, doesn't mean that the economy is going to immediately jump back up and everything's going back to normal. We have permanent changes that we need to address. And so whatever iteration comes next, PPP is not going to be adequate in the same way it was before. We need to have longer term forgivable grants and things like that to support businesses so that we can get through without just having piles and piles of loans on already hurting businesses.
Thank you so much. I mean, basically what I'm hearing is like that this is just a crucial time for all of us small business owners. As COVID-19 cases are still surging across our state and across our nation, it just seems like we need our elected officials to get to work now on a set of proposals that will help us and our communities. And it just seems, unfortunately, like in Wisconsin, a lot of our elected officials would rather play politics. So Joella, I'm going to direct this next question for you. But since the beginning of this pandemic, Republican elected leaders like Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson have continued to perpetuate misinformation and question recommended medical professional advice. Even basic measures like wearing a face mask have become hot button issues somehow. Small business owners are regularly on the front lines of having to enforce these community guidelines and safety measures like mask wearing. How have you or your staff's jobs been affected by this continued spread of misinformation by some of our elected leaders?
Yeah, thank you. I think our business is a little bit maybe unique in this sense, in that we don't have staff. We're essentially especially right now, a one-person operation. I have a full-time job in addition to helping run our business. My husband does the string repair and manages the sales, and we're doing all of that by appointment right now rather than just having the doors open. But basically, if my husband's at the store working, I'm at home educating our kids or taking care of our kids, or vice versa. So we don't have a staff member who can be right there by the door, as people come in to remind, hey, do you have your mask? Can you use this hand sanitizer? Those kinds of things. So him trying to manage that, at times it feels like a safety concern because it's literally just him there. So if somebody were to become aggressive or upset, there'd be nobody to intervene. And we've been fortunate in that we know our customers. I mean, they know us, and we've built relationships with our customers. And so for the most part, people understand we expect them to wear a mask. We're following safety precautions. That's our expectation. But we are getting the occasional passerby who just, isn't familiar with the shop and just walks in and ignores the, please call for an appointment sign on the door, walks in without a mask, and Ty will say, hey, please put a mask on. And, oh, you're one of those, oh, come on. Don't you know it's just a flu? And it's exhausting. I mean, we are frankly just exhausted by our lives right now because of everything that we're juggling. And so to have to defend, these practices that we're using to keep ourselves and our community safe, for someone who isn't even necessarily intending to, patronize our business, it's just kind of exhausting. It's an expenditure of energy and time it's very frustrating. And so just the idea that I'm kind of a public health nerd, and so like the idea that public health recommendations have become politicized is mind-blowing. And our elected leaders should be role models in, you know, sort of leading the charge for public health and keeping everyone safe and healthy. And the idea that, you know, we're going to make light of mask wearing or, you know, these various public health recommendations for political reasons is frankly unconscionable to me. It's killing people. And we want our businesses to thrive. We want our customers to be able to safely patronize our businesses. We want to be safe, you know, while we're at work and trying to keep our businesses going. And so seeing that politicized is very disappointing and very frustrating.
I hear you on that. I feel in some ways like we're all being asked to do this double duty where we're small business owners, but we're also somehow supposed to be the public health enforcement for the state and for the nation, because there's, you know, no sort of universal rules for how things are supposed to go. And I can hear that for sure.
Can I comment just for?
Yes, go ahead, Darren.
You know, and you know what Joella said is, and Corinne and the others, you know, families are affected by this. And, you know, let's be fair. Senator Ron Johnson is working very, very hard at embarrassing himself. And so I have yet to hear the words come out of his mouth about Wisconsin businesses and what we're going through. And so there's a total disconnect. And I'll just say this, we as business owners really need to get involved in our government, because we know what the background and the backbone is to community. Community creates state and so forth. And we really, I feel for Joella and all of them. We don't have small children anymore, but the point is that that dynamic is not even brought up nor discussed at the national level, let alone our in-state. And so it bothers me greatly. And it disturbs me to hear things like that. Just wanted to comment. I'll be quiet.
No worries. No, you're fine. I love to hear everybody's perspective. I mean, in fact, what's more this week, instead of fighting for the aid that you're all talking about needing, that we're talking about needing, Senator Johnson particularly used his time to rail against an election that has already been decided, and to fight to give corporations, large corporations, a liability shield when their workers get sick because of the absence of protocols that they may or may not have put in place. Meanwhile, back on Main Street in the real world, we still need relief, and small businesses like yours are trying to keep people safe, trying to keep yourselves safe, trying to keep your staff safe, trying to keep your customers safe, and trying to stay afloat. And I just think it definitely says something to me about his priorities and just our elected leaders' priorities. Becky, I don't know if you'd care to comment on that and what you think about that.
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating to see him repeating the ridiculous lies about election fraud and things like that when there are real issues that we need to address right now. We have a situation where the people who need to go in person to work, who cannot move their jobs to being online, are in a much higher rate of risk, and don't have proper protections in place. So if they are feeling sick, we are seeing that people are either hiding that or going to work sick, or they have to make the choice to go get tested and wait for results. It's really frustrating, and not having childcare in place and things like that. If your child is feeling sick, again, you run that risk of either transmitting germs, a virus, in a terrible way, or risk losing your job. Things like the family, the paycheck protection for people who need to stay home and take care of their loved ones or for themselves, that needs to be extended and enhanced as well. And that, rather than focusing on whether or not votes were stolen and ridiculous things like that.
Yeah, thank you. Corinne, just to piggyback on what Becky was saying, just about childcare in general, and I know you talked about this a little bit, but what steps did you actually have to take to ensure the safety of yourself and your staff members during the pandemic? Did you have guidelines? Did you come up with your own? Like, what kind of economic impacts are there if you have to buy certain things? Like, how is that working?
So, there wasn't anything. Basically, the state, it was delightful because we were always included in with the schools with everything that was coming out. Well, then Evers announced schools were closing. Childcare, nothing. No word, nothing. I'm talking about all kinds of people that I know across the state. We're all like, what's going on? Are we open? Are we closed? I don't know what to tell my families. Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m., we were told we were to stay open for essential workers. Yeah. That was fun. We're like, wait, what? We were closing. We were, oh, what? So that was really hard. And a lot of us did, like to Darren's point, a lot of us got our computers fired up, got our phones fired up, and we sent messages and we're like, this cannot happen. You have to tell us what we are supposed to be doing. You cannot tell us that we're with schools and then say, oh, wait, by the way, we really need you to stay open because we need these people to be able to go to work. So they kind of also then did leave it up to us if we were going to stay open or not, which then makes it difficult because I'm not a public health person. I don't know if it's safe. I don't know what to look for. I had an intern at the time also as well, and she got the communication from her school that we recommend you don't go, but you can if you want. Her son actually was with me here for care, so she felt like he was already being exposed, so she did stick with me for the extra week while I kind of figured out what my families were doing. And then I did end up closing because all my families ended up being able to work from home, at least one person, and I felt that closing was the safer option. I did procure a PPP. Wisconsin Early Childhood Association is our statewide network for early childhood educators, and they did a phenomenal job. They started getting on the phone. They started figuring things out. They came out with COVID contracts and policies for us to use, and that ended up being used nationwide by multiple people. I'm part of a nationwide group called Essential Not Expendable. There's 8,000 of us. This just popped up in March. There's 8,000 early childhood educators on this page, and we share all kinds of information and stories and what's your state doing and all of that. But we were promised PPE back in March. I just got my box last week. So that's hard because we didn't have masks, we didn't have sanitizer. We're just people. Most of us don't have buying power. We go to the grocery store to get bleach. We go to the grocery store when they had all of the food, like the meat and everything, or milk. We're supposed to get that for our kids. We couldn't go to the store and purchase more than what you were allotted, even though we were childcare providing food for 8 kids in a family and more than that in a group, because we're just one person and there was no little exemption card or no way for us to prove that we were who we said we were. So then we're scrambling to try and feed these children, and stay open and stay safe. So that was tough. We did, like I say, just got some things. We did get the CARES Act funding, so that helped us out tremendously. But that, by the time speaking of our state legislative body, by the time the Joint Finance Committee approved the way that DCF was going to allocate the funding, it was already July. The money was allocated to us in March. We got back pay. Basically, thank you, but really you could have and should have met. And that was after 2,000 of us sent letters to our representatives and said, you need to get us this money. And also just the healthcare workers, first responders screaming, we need a place for our kids to go. What do you mean? Like, we cannot have these people closing. So that was a lot of it. I do know the National Association for the Education of Young Children is our national group. They just did a survey a few weeks ago and it just came out this week. 51% in Wisconsin do not know how much longer we're going to be able to stay open. And that is with Evers using his unrestricted funds to allocate more to childcare. I don't know what's going to happen if the federal government doesn't come through. I don't know what's going to happen if our state doesn't decide that childcare matters and our kids matter and our families matter. So that's it. Is Melissa frozen?
Yeah. And it sounds like for you too.
Uh-oh.
All right, I'm sorry if I was cutting out there a little bit. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, okay. So Joella, I'd like to go back to you and just say, despite the nearly 300,000 lives lost nationwide and still unknown number of jobs and businesses that are forever gone, some political figures have been praising the overall U.S. pandemic response at this point. How would you rate the U.S. pandemic response and our state's pandemic response? And do you have any suggestions to fix it?
Boy, how do I put this politely? It's insufficient. It's inadequate. It's frankly been atrocious, I think, both at the federal level and in our case at the state level. Essentially, it feels like and when I say we, I mean small business owners, I mean families, I mean just human beings have just been abandoned by our government and sort of left to navigate this hellscape, without really any map or tools to understand how to do that. And back, a couple of the others have referenced this too. When this all started, it was like, okay, we're trying to plan, how are we going to get through a couple of weeks or maybe a month or two and navigate all this? And then it's just been, it's before we know it, it's going to be a year. And, hoping that our businesses are going to make it that long to just kind of keep limping along and hopefully bounce back. But in terms of, what should have been done or how things should have been different, I think, to me, it seems obvious that if our leaders had in the very beginning provided just some direct aid to families and said, hey, we need all businesses except those absolutely essential businesses to shut down for a month. And we're going to provide you with what you need so that your family's not going to starve. You're not going to lose your home. You're not going to lose your business. I don't think that we would be in the situation that we're in right now. I think that if we had done that economically, our economy would have been much better off right now. Our kids would be in school right now. We'd be functioning in our businesses. And yes, we'd probably still be taking some different public health precautions, but we wouldn't be in the situation we're in right now, where we're facing, an even further economic crisis than we're already in, as some of these protections are looking to expire. So just looking back, if things had been done differently from the get-go, both at the state level and at the federal level, I just really don't think we needed to lose all those lives and all the businesses that have already been lost and the challenges that we're all facing.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that Wisconsinites' lives are on the line, and it's time for our legislature to act and not play politics. Our legislature hasn't passed a single bill since April, actually, despite this ongoing crisis. Well, all the rest of us have been out here fighting for our lives and our livelihoods. Instead of working across the aisle to enact COVID relief for the Badger State, it just seems like they're not listening to us. Darren, I'd like to go to you and just talk a little bit about what you think this economic crisis for businesses like yours throughout Wisconsin, if there's no state or federal action, are you going to be able to make it? Is it going to get better? Is it going to get worse? Stay the same? What are you thinking?
Well, overall, I'm a very optimistic person. And I believe that if all of us hang in there, we'll be better for it on the other side. I think it would be very naive of us to think that our representatives care. So we spend a lot of energy and we get exhausted thinking that they should care. We care about what we do as professionals, business owners, and so forth. But the concerning piece is that it's not that they didn't know that this issue was coming way back in February. They were deliberately indifferent to it. And when you have people who are deliberately indifferent, you're trying to get them to care about something, us. And it just didn't happen. and it continues not to happen. And I have a problem with that. I don't know. We have to wake up, I think, as a state and just get rid of these people. If all of us business owners didn't open our doors for 244 days and expected the customers to pay us, I mean, that's lunacy. But yet they don't respond to our needs, and these are immediate. We're not asking for something that some special entitlement. We're asking because we've contributed to our community, our state, and our federal government. And during this time of crisis, we need help. And I get sick and tired of trying to beg for it. They ought to be here doing the work of the people. And it's not happening. So we're going to have to, when all this blows over, there ought to be a whole lot of empty seats. And we need to get people in there who care, who are community oriented and understand what it's like to work through a pandemic and trying to make things happen. This is what's so difficult. I don't know what's going to happen in a lot of restaurants. I know a lot of them have closed, and you have savings and you utilize your savings to get through. Again, waiting for instruction. Nobody, we had this void of leadership in Washington. Throw money at it. Well, then we had to realize the PPP had to be paid back, earlier. Well, we can't do that. It's not going to work. And it's not going to work. Okay. I mean, there was no plan. All of us started our businesses with a business plan. The government, they don't have one. And I mean, I would never let my 5-year-old grandson drive my car. And that's what we've done. Are we surprised that we're crashing all over the place? I'm sorry. I just can't. I'm exhausted. I am tired. It's a challenge. We're going to get through it. We'll be all right. Hang in there. Please don't quit. And things will get better. But we have to change things when we come on the other side of this. We've got to hold those people accountable for the things that they were deliberately indifferent to, and that is to our needs. And we cannot forget that. I'm off my soapbox now.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I like your soapbox. Honestly, as a fellow restaurant owner, I hear you, and this is something that I've kind of talked about a little bit. And I said, you should be careful, lawmakers, how many small business owners you put out of business, because we know how to get things done, because we don't go home at the end of the day until the work is done. That's because right. We, and we're not afraid. Nobody's unclogging our toilets at our business except for each and every one of us who is on that call. We might be restaurant owners. We might, be dealing with instruments or family entertainment or childcare. But at the end of the day, that means everything that has to do with your building, everything that has to do with your insurance, your payroll, all of those other things. So we're used to multitasking and pivoting and getting things done. So I sometimes think they should be a little bit more cautious about putting us all out of business.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, we're going to need jobs on the other side at some point. So thank you so much for your comments. I think what I'm hearing from all of you is basically that we just need our elected officials to fight for us, to actually fight for us. That's what their job is. It's what they signed up for. And Wisconsin needs to be a place where all of us can survive and thrive. And we can, if they just listen to us and do the work and do what we're asking them for. So we do need to kind of get moving towards wrapping up. But what I'd like to do is just call on each of you in turn, and then you can just share any sort of final thoughts with us. Or anything else that you wanted to address that we haven't been able to get to. So Becky, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I think the biggest things I want our elected officials to hear, the first is that without small businesses, our communities do not exist. So any town can have an Applebee's and a Walmart and all that, but without the Odd Ducks and Bounce Milwaukee's and barbecue places and all these, our communities are not the same. And once these businesses die, we can't bring that back in the same way. We lose the community. So it's really, really important that we are prioritizing small businesses. the other big thing is that we can't take on additional loans. That's not actually helpful at this time. We need direct aid to individuals so that they can come and spend money in the small businesses, and we need direct aid to the businesses in the forms of grants and assistance in that way. That's really, really urgent right now. Otherwise, we're going to see a massive, massive economic collapse that rolls out in waves.
Yeah, I hear you. As far as the debt goes, I know for me personally, my economic injury disaster loan that I qualified for is more than the debt I originally went into to start my small business. So, that means
we're on the verge of paying off our initial debt to open, and now if we're able to reopen after all of this, we will have a much larger loan than we started with.
That's exactly where we are. It's like 10 years in, we're back to actually worse than where we started.
Yes.
We're actually in more debt. So it's mind-bogglingly frustrating.
Terrifying.
Yes. Corrine, if you could just, say one sort of succinct message that you'd want to give to lawmakers who have the power to ease your economic burdens, what would that be? What would be your kind of final thoughts and what you'd want to say directly to them?
So my final thoughts would be, first off, McConnell, put the bills out there, please. There's $50 billion that passed the House for childcare. Strong bipartisan support. You won't even let it see the light of day. Senator Johnson, I have reached out to your office. I either get nothing back or I get, that's a state's issue. Well, I'm sorry, you're my federal representative for my state. So why aren't you bringing my state dollars back? As far as our state level goes, again, Republicans, we don't care about the Christmas tree in the middle of the Capitol. You showed up at work for that. Show up for work for everything else. And yes, this is not supposed to be a partisan issue at all. This is bipartisan, but you're making it that way. You don't show up to work. My Democratic representatives, Senator Erpenbach and Sandy Pope, have come to meetings that I've asked for my child care groups, and have come and helped us figure out how to reach out to you. And as Senator Erpenbach said, you work for us, and it's up to us as individuals to call you out and to remind you who you work for. And if this state wasn't gerrymandered, all of you probably would be out right now. So as they said, probably should watch out who you're putting out of business, because if we have the time and we have the inclination, we might just have to go after you. So there's that. But I just also wanted to say that there is strong bipartisan support in Wisconsin for childcare investment. We just did a survey and found out of Republican voters, 70% of all voters support an additional investment of $60 million a year in the child care industry. But Republicans, 90% agreed early care and education are crucial for parents. 78% agree that high quality, affordable childcare is an essential service. 74% agree that 2 working parents are necessary in today's economy. I know you like to pretend that the mom should stay home, but that's not reality. And mom shouldn't stay home unless mom wants to stay home. Same with dads. They want to stay home, they should be able to, but they shouldn't have to. 73% agree that early care and education programs help children learn more quickly before they start school. And overall, it has been proven that for every dollar spent on early care and education, we get back $16. 90% of kids' brains are developed by the age of 5. 100% of that is because of the relationships with the person that they spend their time with. So please remember that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Joella, let's go to you. And I'd like to say, just share your final thoughts as with everyone else, and maybe just touch on why small businesses like your own matter to your community, and why it's important for elected officials to act now to protect us.
Thank you. I really can just echo what Becky and Corrine have shared in their pleas to our elected officials. I think, speaking about the impact of small businesses like ours on communities, we help. I mean, this is cliche, but the small businesses in our community are really the glue that holds our community together. We know who our neighbors are. We are there to support other businesses. We know, whose kids, play what instrument and what sort of help they need. And, our business is built around accessibility and inclusion of everyone. Music, it's an art, it's a language, it's something that everyone can do, and it really brings people together. And so and I hear that from all of these businesses, are places that bring people together to just share in community together, to get to know each other, and to build our communities as strong people who care about each other, who look out for each other, and that, you know, has ripples throughout the community. So when you lose small businesses, you lose those connections in communities, and we need to hang on so that we have something to live for and something to look forward to when this is all behind us. You know, if this ends and there's no place for kids to go hang out, my own kids are like, when can we go to a trampoline park again? You know, if there's no place to go get your instrument fixed, if there's no place to go have barbecue, you know, what is there to look forward to? It's pretty grim to think about. So it's just, my succinct message is, we're tired and we need help. You know, we need to survive this so that our communities can thrive, and we need help to do that.
Thank you so much. Darren, I'll let you have this kind of final thought there. What would your message to our elected officials be?
I really think that they, you know, I don't know. I've had conversations with some representatives, and there's just a disconnect. It's like, if you can picture for a moment that there's a burning building and Ron Johnson has his back to the building and there's people jumping out of it, and you and I are saying, look, he says, yeah, they'll be okay. And you're just watching everything fall apart. And there is a disconnect. I don't know what you do or how you go about getting people to have empathy. Okay. It'd just be like trying to get the president to have empathy. He doesn't have any. Mitch McConnell has the heart of a 9-year-old, and it's on his desk in a jar. That's the kind of, but that's what I mean. And these are real people who don't understand that real people are having issues. And so we have to change the landscape. We have gerrymandering, they set it up, but we're going to have to go knock on doors. We're going to go visit farmers. We got to, go into the community and get people, to support. Because small towns are going to dry up. What Joelle and Corinne and Becky said, and as well, Melissa, that if the small businesses go away, the community dies. And with that goes the tax base. I mean, so it is a decline. And once that gets going, it's hard. It's going to be very, very difficult to stop it. Infusing money after the fact, who's going to want to get started again after you've seen what your legislators and those organizations feel about you? And my final note is, we had our middle son lives in Milwaukee, and we had their birthday party or something at the Bounce in Milwaukee last year. So we had a blast. But anyway, thank you for this opportunity. And I always get fired up after these type of interactions. And I wake up in a sweat thinking I've ran for office or something. And I realize, I've got to go to work. But we do need to do something. We're going to have to get involved at some point, because nobody cares about us but us.
Yeah, well, thank you. It really seems that way sometimes. Once again, a huge thank you to all of you. I, as a small business owner, know how hard it is sometimes to make time to do things like this. And especially now, I think sometimes people think, oh, you're slower, so you must have more time. But realistically, doing what we do now is something we do not know how to do. And so it takes up even more of our time and more of our brain space. So I really respect you all. And I hope to see you all on the other side of this. I hope all of your businesses survive. And the reality is, we don't know, any of us, if that's going to be true for any of us. So I thank you so much for being part of this conversation, so we can let people know what we're going through and what we need. Thank you so much to everyone who turned in to our conversation live, or anyone who's watching later on. These conversations are really important, and there's still tons of work to be done here in Wisconsin and across our nation. I'd also like to highlight once again the co-hosts for tonight's conversation, Opportunity Wisconsin and the Main Street Alliance. For those of you at home, you can keep following along with these conversations by following Opportunity Wisconsin and Main Street Alliance on social media or visiting their websites. Thanks again for joining us this evening. Thanks to all of you. I super appreciate you, and I wish you all the very best of luck and a very happy holiday. Stay safe out there. See you soon.